Welcome. My name is Luke Grand from Practical Farmers of Iowa. This is a special PFI Farminar, which is the name of our webinar series. I am Luke Grand, the host and staff member of Practical Farmers. What a spring. Challenging weather has again forced our hands to get creative. And as you can see here from a PFI member's farm, boy, it was a rough May. And Albion, especially and near Marshalltown, was a very challenging part of the state, as I'm sure many other folks can attest tonight. But boy, this is a great time to get creative, and we welcome many new folks that are interested in getting creative with our challenges, with including a great group of folks at the Certified Crop Advisors, the Iowa CCAs. Thank you very much for joining us tonight, this afternoon, excuse me. We usually do our Farminars in the evening, so it's I got to get my head wrapped around our new time. In the next 90 minutes, you will get great information from a diverse array of resource professionals spanning several agencies, and Iowa Department of Ag Land Stewardship, Natural Resource Conservation Service, and the Certified Crop Advisors, as well as Risk Management Agency, Iowa State Extension, and our own Practical Farmers of Iowa information from our farmer-led organization and our research with cover crops. We hope you will leave this online seminar with more ideas and a better feel for your options available with cover crops. But first, I'd like to make you aware of a couple opportunities where you can get together with more farmers and learn. We hope you join our organization. Practical Farmers of Iowa has just $20 for students, $40 for individuals, and $50 a year for the whole farm to be a member and start reaping all the great benefits of our network. Keep up with us online on our Facebook page if you want to check us out a little more and see what we're up to. And if you want to talk about cover crops, there's no better place to look than Practical Farmers of Iowa's cover crops. This spring, we had 1,600 farmers attend several events across the state, and we got a new event coming up in the end of June 26th, 2013, and let me tell you a little bit about that. Click that link if you're interested in getting together with farmers to learn about cover crops, because from 10 a.m. to noon, outside of Dyersville, you've got an opportunity to learn from farmers about this practice. And if you want to learn more information or ask any questions, call our staff member, Lauren, at 515-232-5661. She'll be glad to help get you there on time and get you the right directions. Finally, our agenda for tonight, we will conclude promptly at 4:30, and we're going to get all this great information in there before that time and include time for your questions. The last 20 minutes are reserved for your questions, and we're looking forward to having and seeing those in the chat box at the left. So please feel free to put a question in at any time, and we'd be glad to answer those questions during the discussion. And this is also recorded, so if you want to go back and re-listen to what we talked about today, that's going to be available at practicalfarmers.org/Farminar. Look for that by the middle of next week to be online. We hope to put it online sooner, but that'll definitely be online by the end of the week. At this time, I'd like to welcome our first speaker, Jim Frederick from the Iowa Certified Crop Advisors, and his special note to CCAs who are participating. Jim, do you want to take the microphone, and I'll switch over to your slides.
Okay, thank you, Luke. Welcome to everyone this afternoon. On behalf of the Certified Crop Advisors, I'm Jim Frederick, and I'm on the state board. And the genesis of this whole presentation today kind of came about just a week ago at one of our board meetings, and we thought it was a pertinent topic and something we needed to get out. And I can see by the list of folks that are on the that have signed in that apparently there is some interest out there. So thank you for joining. How do I get to the next slide?
Click the arrow
right
in the
there?
lower left corner.
There we go. Okay, for you that are certified crop advisors, we are offering continuing education credits. Today's session is 1.5 hours of soil and water. If you signed in, you are instructed to put your number, your CCA number behind your last name, as I have an example there on the screen. Good news, it is soil and water credits, and it's free today, so they are always a bit of a challenge to get in, and hopefully you'll find it worth your time today. We would like feedback. You know, this is really the first time that we've tried this kind of thing with a timely webinar on issues important to us. It's a good way to get it out timely, but we would like to have some feedback from the participants to see if there's ways we could improve. And we also are interested in the content, and if you found that to be worthwhile, and also any other topics that might be covered. In addition, if you have anyone that is interested after the fact, it is archived, as Luke mentioned, and if you want to get CCA credits for that, you would need to send a note to Joan O'Brien. Her email address is there. I'm sure a lot of you know her, but there is a deadline of 5 p.m. on the 24th. So if you know somebody that would like to listen in, it will be archived, and you can get CCA credits there as well. We'll head over to the next slide here. I just got this morning and sent to me by a friend of mine at the Iowa Farm Bureau, and I guess I came up with the heading there that said cover crops going from a negative to a positive, but it's that might be a little hard to read, but the press release was from Secretary of Agriculture Bill Northey, suggesting that cover crops would be a good practice on some of these acres that unfortunately we've not been able to plant. And I guess I took that as maybe perhaps taking a negative situation and making it as positive as you can, and that's kind of why I put that on the top. I think there's things we can do that will enhance going forward, even though we find ourselves in kind of a rough situation. And I think that's where Bill Northey's headed on this in his statements, as well as I guess let's take lemons and make lemonade. And I think hopefully we can talk about that today. Disclaimer: make sure that after the webinar that you also check with your local governmental folks, NRCS, FSA, those kinds of folks. Certainly talk to your crop insurance providers and make sure that everything is in alignment. Input suppliers, if you're going to have things done with them or through them, they certainly should be in the loop. And product availability, specifically with the seeds and that kind of thing that you're going to put down, a little forewarning and a little pre-planning and checking with those folks certainly can ease some of the planning in that process. Okay. If you would like more information past what we're going to talk about today, there's a few places I would suggest. One of them, this is still a bit tentative, but especially for the Agribusiness Association of Iowa and the CCAs who attended the showcase at the fairgrounds this past February, I believe it was. You're also invited to a summer AAI showcase. The data here is tentative, but it appears it'll be July 26th. It's going to be in Independence, Iowa. It is free, and there will be Certified Crop Advisor continuing education credits available, and most of that focus will be around cover crops and those types of things. So you might write down the date. We'll, I'm sure, get more information out to you as that becomes available. Another place you might look is the CCA website. I just took a little snapshot of it, but you can go down and search for the state of Iowa or a specific topic, and a lot of field days and whatnot are going to be put on that website. Practical Farmers of Iowa, and today we're in conjunction with those folks to bring you a lot of this information. They have a very nice website that talks about cover crops and information you can find there. Also on the right, I have a snapshot of their calendar. So you can find a tremendous amount of different events that may be in your local area, and the topics, I know one in my county, Adair County, is listed on there, which I believe is next week, and it's kind of a cover crops soil health day. So a great place to go for a pretty diverse posting of things around cover crops. Also, Iowa State Extension, certainly tune into those folks. Talk to your local NRCS and soil and water groups. Many of them will be having field days and tours and that kind of thing. Just local farmers. Obviously, there's a lot of cover crops that have been put in just in the last year, so certainly search out some of those farmers that have you might have driven by and noticed they had a cover crop, and might be worth giving them a phone call and seeing if you could talk to them a little bit about what they did. And certainly our whole ag supplier industry, those folks can be a wealth of information as well. If you want some published material, I did find a couple books that I have accessed in the past. The one on the left is from Purdue. It's a pocket guide, and I actually have one in my back pocket as I speak. It's about maybe 60, 80 pages, something like that, and it's something you can put on the dash of your pickup or in your back pocket. I believe they're $5, and you can order those online. The other one that we see a lot is the Managing Cover Crops Profitably, and I've got a link there. That is actually, the whole book is on a PDF, so you can order the book if you'd like, but you can also simply pull it up PDF style and read it off the computer and do it that way as well. Finally, just a quick plug for our Agribusiness Showcase. I mentioned the one we had this past February. These are the dates for the next one that will be, I'm pretty sure, at the fairgrounds again. Just save those dates if you would. I could almost guarantee you that cover crops will be a big topic at a lot of the training that we offer on the Agribusiness Showcase Conference next February. So with that, again, welcome. Looks like we have a whole host of folks coming in. So 96, we have 96 people. Excellent. With that, I'll wrap up my end of it and turn the microphone over to Jim Gillespie, who is with Idales.
Thanks, Jim. Good afternoon. Jim Gillespie with the Division of Soil Conservation, Iowa Department of Ag and Land Stewardship. A couple things I want to talk about with you this afternoon is related to the preventative planning is dealing with construction and then some of the issues around the nutrient strategy. I think because of the situation that's arisen with the inability to get out and plant crops this spring and early summer, provides us an opportunity to look at those acres if we intended to put some conservation practices on there, terraces, grade stabilization structures, waterways, water and sediment control basins. It's an opportunity time to get out and do that. It also helps extend the construction season for the contractors through the summer and that type of stuff. So if for unfortunate reasons we weren't able to get a crop in there, it provides an opportunity to get in there and put practices in there. And whether you've signed up for those programs or not, if you've identified a need, if you work with your producers, farmers, and clients, I would go into the local service center, talk to your folks with the Soil and Water Conservation District or the Natural Resource Conservation Service to see about putting some practices on those acres. As indicated, it's an excellent time to build those. We're not destroying crop while we're in there doing that construction. Extends the construction season and helps get those conservation practices in there. Lets the ground settle, and then hopefully it'll be ready for next spring's crops when we get to that point. So if you've got practices planned or considering putting practices in, and you're using the prevent planting as an option here, I would look at trying to do that. I think the other thing to go along with that is those at the service center, you can also find out there may be some financial assistance through various programs, local, state, and federal, that might be able to provide some assistance financially to put those practices in. And in some cases, if erosion occurred out there last year or whatever, some of those needs might be easily identifiable. So work with the folks at the service center to work with those on these prevent plant acres if you can. I'd also encourage you in all cases to contact your insurance agent and those folks to make sure that everybody knows what's happening on those acres during those prevent planting. We do not want anyone to get crossways with any of the program requirements. So always keep everybody informed, and if you got questions, don't hesitate to ask. Is it coming up? Maybe it's not going to come up. Click on which one, Barb? Well, it's not coming up anyway on the screen. But what I want to talk about is related to the nutrient strategy. When we look at these prevent plant acres that aren't getting a crop on them, a couple things can happen. One, you can leave those acres idle, and of course, in an idle condition, you're apt to get weed pressure and that type of stuff, and I'm sure farmers are going to want to address those weed issues. So we're apt to, have to do something, including tillage and that kind of stuff. And there is potential even in that situation where you leave those acres fallow. You could wind up with a fallow syndrome, and hopefully somebody could address that if we get into that situation. But that's why one of the things that we'd encourage for different reasons is the cover crops on those acres, and of course a lot of that can depend on how you want to do that, but it has benefits for a lot of good reasons. It helps build that soil health, that soil quality. It prevents erosion during that, and I'm sure if you're participating in the federal farm programs, you could have compliance issues, so the cover crops can help you in those situations. And from the standpoint, particularly related to the nutrient strategy, cover crops are a practice that's identified in there to help with the nitrogen issues as well as phosphorus issues. So cover crops have a benefit for both reasons on the nutrient side, and is encouraged. I think, as Jim mentioned, and there we go. There's this is a copy of the practice page, looking at practices, and you can see on there cover crops are identified as one of the critical practices to assist with the implementation of the nutrient strategy. So again, this is on the nitrogen side. It's also on the phosphorus side as a management type practice. So we would encourage, as Secretary Northy's press release, doing the things to control erosion during that period, as well as helping to control the nutrients that might be in those soils during this prevent plant period. So take a look at all of those options. Again, work with your folks at the Service Center, at the Natural Resource Conservation Service, and the Saltwater Conservation District, as well as making sure you stay in communication with your insurance agent to let them know what you're doing on those prevent plant acres. It's unfortunate that we're not able to get a crop in there, but I think we can, as Jim said, we can turn a negative into a positive. There are things we can do to enhance those soils, protect them, and make sure they're in the best situation for the crop next spring. So these are a couple opportunities to think about and consider working with your clients, farmers, producers, and service providers. So with that, I will conclude my part of the program and turn it back to you, Luke.
Thank you, Jim. I just wanted to jump in here to make sure folks are seeing the viewer count in the lower right corner of your screen. Feel free to just choose the number of folks that are watching with you today. Our next speaker is Barb Stewart with the NRCS in Des Moines.
Okay. Well, as Luke said, I'm Barb Stewart. I'm the state agronomist with NRCS, and what I'd like to cover today is talking a little bit about prevented planting, and specifically when we have prevented planting on fields that have been considered highly erodible lands in the farm program. So, NRCS's role dealing with farmers in prevented planting is we're there to provide conservation assistance to producers in how they want to handle their conservation needs on those lands. What we're also looking at is our desire is to make sure that those soils are protected from erosion and sediment damage, and we're there also to provide information to producers who have those highly erodible fields and to help them meet their conservation compliance obligations on those fields. So I'm going to try and talk a little bit about what some of those requirements will be. NRCS's role is dealing strictly with the conservation measures on HEL land. If you've got questions about whether your land qualifies for prevented planting or what you can do with those prevented planting acres, you need to be sure and be talking with your crop insurance agent. As Jim mentioned earlier, we want to make sure that everybody stays in compliance with their crop insurance requirements. So, looking at highly erodible acres, one of the best options that we have out there if we can't get a crop in the ground is to provide a cover crop. And there are several options that we can look at. First one is if we have soybean stubble out there, or if the corn stalks have been disturbed, that it either be harvested, if you've harvested off the stover, or you've tilled up the cover crops, then here's the requirements that are needed to protect that land and meet your compliance requirements. You can plant a summer cover crop, and those species are listed in the cover crop for improving soil and prevented planted fields. There are several different areas where you can pick up that document. It was sent out, I believe, with the notice on this webinar, but you can also go to the Iowa NRCS homepage, and on there, if you look at, you'll see actually down at the bottom of the page, it'll talk about cover crops. You click on that link and it'll pull it right up. So there's a list of summer cover crops that are acceptable to plant now, or you could also plant a winter cereal grass, either winter rye, winter wheat, so on, triticale, winter triticale. All these may be used during the summer cover crop period. If you use those, there are some requirements on what you can do with that residue afterwards. After you have the summer cover crop, then you need to be looking at a fall winter cover crop is also required. So there are two time frames. We need to provide cover during the summer since there's no cover out there now, and then we need to provide cover in the fall and winter, so we've got the residue out there that we need the following spring. And those options for the fall winter cover crop, you can either let your summer cover crop volunteer and reseed itself and leave that standing. So for example, if you planted oats now, you could let the oats reseed itself and leave that standing through the winter. You can leave the winter cereal grasses that you planted in the summer standing, and in this case you'll need to leave them unharvested and ungrazed. So if you plant a winter cereal grain in the summer months, then you need to leave that unharvested and ungrazed so that you have the residue there that's needed in the spring. Or now's a good time to come in and reseed a fall winter cover crop by September 15th. And this is also a great opportunity to get some of those winter cover crops that we have a difficult time getting the growth on that we need after a corn crop or after a bean crop. We're now able to plant those earlier in the year so we can get the benefit, a much bigger benefit from that by being able to plant them earlier. We recommend seeding these October 1 to September 15th. The list of those species are, August 1. August 1 to September 15th. The list of those are listed on that fact sheet. And then we also have some species that are also available, some already pre-mixes, I should say. Or you can use the Midwest Cover Crop Council's Cover Crop Decision tool and select species from there. And you need to be selecting that tool for Iowa and select the county that you're in, and then it'll provide the seeding dates and recommended species that are available. So those are some options. Okay, now for undisturbed corn residue. If you have fields out there that they have not touched at all for prevented planting, then we have the option of leaving those corn stalks unshredded, unrolled, or untilled, leaving those standing for that summer cover. You still need to control noxious weeds, and that can be done by mowing or herbicide. And then, come August 1st, you can plant your fall cover crop. So, and again, those species are listed on the fact sheet of the acceptable fall cover crops, or you can develop your own mix from the Midwest Cover Crop Council. So here's just a quick screenshot of that fact sheet. Again, I think it's a 4-page fact sheet, and it lists on the back page the species that are acceptable for prevented planting cover crops for both the summer cover crop and for the fall and winter cover crop. So on that fact sheet, it's also going to provide you some information about the benefits of cover crop. So it'll talk a little bit about building topsoil, so actually improving your organic matter. So now's the time. Do we let the organic matter deteriorate through the summer by doing a lot of tillage, which in a fallow situation, the more tillage you do, the more you destroy your organic matter, or we can build that topsoil by adding those high residue crops out there, such as cover crops. It also discussed a little bit about the soil biology that's going on, the soil structure and compaction, and you can select the cover crop really to meet the needs that you're really trying to accomplish or overcome. And then also it talks a little bit about if you want to build nitrogen for next year's crops or just scavenge the nitrogen. Let's say you've already applied your fertilizer this year, how the cover crops can help hold that nitrogen in place by accumulating it in organic matter and then making it available for the next year's crop. So hopefully we can salvage some of the nutrients that we've applied out there for this year's crop, and then we're not able to utilize it. But you can also look at using nitrogen building legumes out there that can provide more nitrogen for next year's crop. And again, as I mentioned, the cover crop species guidance is in there, as well as suggested mixes, and the mixes are set up by resource concerns. So if you have a soil erosion concern, it'll have set mixes in it. If you look at developing a mix for scavenging nitrogen, it'll have a mix in there for that. If you're looking at alleviating compaction or improving soil tilth, it'll have mixes in there available for that. So why plant cover crops? Cover crops, depending upon what you plant, can provide a lot of opportunities for you. It can provide nitrogen through nitrogen production, such as legumes. And as I mentioned before, it is usually difficult for us to get much nitrogen production when we plant it after a corn or soybean crop. But this is going to give us an opportunity to plant those crops earlier, so we can get the full benefit of a cover crop for nitrogen production. It can help hold the nutrients. If you already applied your nutrients for the current crop that wasn't able to be planted, certain cover crops are great at scavenging and holding those nutrients in place. And then as the cover crop decomposes, they make those nutrients available for the next year's crop. A lot of your grasses, your winter rye or winter cereals, grains, are great for erosion control. They provide the biomass needed for erosion control. And then we have weed suppression. They can suppress them in a couple different ways. One is through just mulching. The simple fact that there's so much plant residue there that it smothers the annual weeds from coming up. And then there's also a chemical suppression that we know of on cereal, some of your cereal grains. We also can increase organic matter. We know that no-till helps us improve our soil organic matter. When we couple that with cover crops, it can really jump on increasing that organic matter. And once we increase the organic matter, we're increasing the nutrient exchange between the soil and the plants. Also the water holding capacity of that soil. And that organic matter also improves the soil tilth. So that organic matter can help with aggregate stability. So it can help those aggregates hold themselves in place and make the water or the pore space more available for water to be moving down through the soil profile. So there's a lot of things that those cover crops can help provide. One thing that we talk about a lot within RCS is improving soil health, and the benefits of cover crop is that it helps keep that soil alive and active. And what we mean by that is not only earthworms and the soil, the roots that are in there, but it's keeping the fungi and the bacteria and the microfauna available for those crops. And what we've been finding is the glues from those fungi help tremendously in transferring a lot of the nutrients to the plant roots. So how does cover crops improve soil health? We talked a little bit about this, building soil organic matter, increasing water infiltration, reducing soil compaction, and boosting microbiology activities. So cover crops can, depending upon what you plant, can really help in those areas. Other cover crop benefits. It can attract beneficial insects to an area. It can also attract pollinators. We usually don't worry too much about this in a corn bean since they're self-pollinating somewhat, but they attract the pollinators and can help improve the pollinators in the area. It also looks at pest suppression. Weeds are just one of the pest suppressions. It also looks at suppressing insects by having beneficial insects there. It's also a big benefit for wildlife habitat. One of the big things that you see at a lot of your, like the Deer Classic and Pheasants Forever, some of those big banquet areas or big conferences, is they're always promoting establishing food plots. Well, those food plots are just diverse cover crops. So can you imagine, if a producer goes out there and plants a 4 or 5 acre food plot, what it'd be like if we're planting, 60, 80 acre food plots out there. It's really going to benefit the wildlife habitat. The other thing is cover crops can be used for forage for haying or grazing. Now, you have to keep in mind that on prevented planting, there are some requirements that you cannot hay or graze, I believe it's November 1st. So you need to be working closely with your insurance agent to make sure that you're not putting your prevented planting payments in jeopardy. But cover crops also offer haying and grazing opportunities, but not only for prevented planting acres, but for other opportunities for using cover crops, maybe not necessarily prevented planting. Okay, the first thing you really need to do when you're looking at cover crops is determine what your goal is. Make the cover crops work for you. So if you have a compaction problem, select the cover crops that are going to benefit in alleviating that compaction. We hear a lot about oilseed radish, and a lot of you have seen this great big radish that they grow. Again, we can't grow that big radish after a corn crop or after a soybean crop, but now we have an opportunity to grow some of those. So if you've got a compaction problem out there, and if it was a prevented planting field, it probably was wet, and if you got out there and created some compaction problems, here's an opportunity for you now to alleviate some of those problems. So determine what your goals are, and then select the cover crops that meet or will benefit those. For more information, if you go to the agronomy section of our Iowa NRCS website, you will find the prevented planting fact sheet, but there's also a lot of other information there on cover crops. So you're more than welcome to go to that. To make it a little easier for you, right on our home page, you can click on the prevented planting fact sheet for cover crops, or you can also click right on an agronomy link, and it'll take you to the agronomy link. And it'll also have on there a lot of your publications that have been mentioned earlier. The Cover Crops Profitably publication will be on there, as well as a link to the Midwest Cover Crop Council and the Cover Crop Selector tool. Some other good resources available. We've already mentioned Managing Cover Crops Profitably. The Midwest Cover Crop Council. I believe it was also mentioned that Practical Farmers of Iowa has a lot of information. They do a lot of on-farm research, and they'll publish some of those research information, or results, I should say, on the Practical Farmers of Iowa. And there's also several articles that have been posted on Plant Cover Crops website. And there's other websites out there that are available. So NRCS is really starting to focus on soil health, and cover crops are an important issue to help us looking at soil health and improving some of the soil tilth that are out there. So, I guess for additional information, if you need it on prevented planting, whether you qualify, make sure you contact your insurance agent. If you're looking at conservation measures, what cover crops will fit your particular goal, stop by the NRCS office. We'll be glad to help you in your planning to address some of those issues. So with that, I believe I am done. So Luke, I will turn it back over to you. Yeah, Luke, are you still there?
I'm sorry, folks. I'm sorry about that. I didn't have my button turned on. Okay, Kevin Erickson from RMA, can you turn on your mic?
Yep. Can you hear me?
Yes, and which PDF do you want me to start with?
Oh, the website when the links to the fact sheets.
There you are.
Okay, thanks, Luke, and hello, everyone. My name is Kevin Erickson. I work with the Risk Management Agency in St. Paul. We're the regional office for RMA, Iowa, Minnesota, and Wisconsin are our three states. I do want to echo the comments from other speakers about contacting your crop insurance agent before you make decisions that may impact your crop insurance payments. But I will also say that there are some things that crop insurance allows that FSA and NRCS may not allow, and so you better make sure you check with those offices too before any of that, any decision really gets made. It's a lot of things to keep straight, but they're all important, of course. On the screen, the top link there is to our RMA homepage. Lots of good information there. The second one down is our St. Paul regional office page, where we have all these fact sheets that are shown below here, and as well as other information. So you could use those links for that. We did publish a news release on haying and grazing of cover crops. That is there, as you see. Also a cover crop fact sheet that talks about insuring crops following a cover crop. Now that would have been if you had crops in place this spring and then wanted to put a crop on, not so much the prevented planting acres that we've been talking about. And then we do have a couple other things there too, prevented planting options, going through some scenarios that I'll go through later. In that prevented planting fact sheet, the next one down does outline some options that I'll go through now today also, but there are options for producers for crop insurance when they do have prevent plant acres, and what can they do with those acres. And I will say that the next one down is probably a little premature here, but recently this week, in fact, RMA published the 2014 cover crop fact sheets, and that outlines really what we're going to do going forward, starting with the fall planted crops in 2013, and how cover crops and subsequently insured crops will be handled. And the last link there is to our actuarial information browser, where we have all of our insurance documents. And if you can go to that other sheet that I sent you, Luke, that shows the special provisions of insurance. That's what it's going to look like, and it's published, it's out to the public now using our actuarial information browser that you saw the link on the previous page. But this would be the statement that is going to be in every county in Iowa where we have wheat that's insurable, and we're saying insurance shall attach to a crop following a cover crop when the cover crop meets the definition provided in the basic provisions. And that's really talking about needing it for conservation purposes and soil health. And that cover crop needed to be planted within the last 12 months. And then we say it's managed and terminated according to NRCS guidelines. We're not going to try to do anything like we did for 2013, and telling folks they had to destroy it by a certain date or harvest it by a certain date. It's all going to be managed and terminated according to NRCS guidelines. And then if certain growing conditions kind of are abnormal, such as like a year like this year, and they need a deviation to the guidelines, the producers should contact either their extension offices or their local NRCS office for management guidance. And then lastly, that last sentence, it gives the link to the NRCS page that talks about the acceptable cover crops and the termination methods and all of that. So that's going to be what we're going to use for 2014. And for us, that isn't that far away. We have published 2014 documents for fall planted crops. And again, this document you're seeing on the screen is out to the public in that AIB, or Actuarial Information Browser, that you can access through our Risk Management Agency website. So that's going to be a big change for 2014. Back to 2013 now for the kind of options that insureds have on not only prevent plant acres, but what they can do even planting some crops. I'll just go through a few scenarios. I don't have slides for these, but I'll just explain what can be done. It certainly isn't completely comprehensive. There's lots of options, but I'll go through some of them. If people couldn't get corn planted timely in Iowa, which was May 31st, they could always choose to plant corn in the late planting period, which runs another 25 days. And so that late planting period is going on now, started June 1st and will end June 25th. If a producer chooses to plant corn during this time, they will have their liability or their insurance guarantee reduced just 1% a day for each day that the planting is delayed after that May 31st final planting date. Now, if they decide not to plant corn, got too late for whatever reason, so they were declaring prevented planting corn, they could plant a cover crop on those acres anytime during that late planting period of corn, June 1 through June 25. If they do plant that cover crop, they'd have some options. If they decided they wanted to hay or graze that cover crop before November 1st, or otherwise harvest that cover crop, for example, if you wanted to combine oats or something for grain at any time, so you could harvesting at any time, you would not receive a prevented planting payment for corn. You're going to be able to plant that second crop and harvest it, but you wouldn't be able to collect prevented planting corn because you did get another crop planted. Even if it was a cover crop, if you decided to plant that cover crop during the corn late planting period. If you choose to plant during that late planting period for corn, but you don't hay or graze until November 1st or later, you could receive 100% of that prevent plant payment for corn, which is really normally the 60% of your full corn guarantee. Prevent planting payment is set at 60%. There are a couple of buy-up options up to 65 and 70%, but most people in Iowa probably didn't take that because preventive planting is normally not needed. So again, if you wait until haying and grazing after November 1st or November 1st or later, that is, you can collect that prevent plant guarantee for corn. Now, again, if you were prevented from planting corn and planted that cover crop after June 25th, after the late planting period for corn, you would be able to hay and graze before November 1st, but you would only get 35% of that prevent plant payment for corn. And again, you could hay or graze after November 1st or later, and receive that 100% prevent plant payment for corn. Now, another option for planting is we do say you can even continue to plant corn after the late planting period, after June 25th, but the guarantee then, instead of like on the 25th of June, the producer would have a reduced guarantee of 25%. Planting on June 26th drops that guarantee an extra 15%, that they would only collect their prevent plant guarantee, which again is normally 60%. So there are certainly some downsides to planting, especially planting corn after June 25th. Now, again, you could prevent plant corn and plant any other second crop after June 25th, even soybeans or something, harvest that crop at any time, and then still receive 35% of their prevented planting payment for corn. So there's lots of ins and outs, and there's more than even that I've explained. But again, for producers, they should talk to their crop insurance agent to find out what the consequences of their actions would be for crop insurance. Now, that agent isn't going to tell the producer what to do. They will be able to offer options and explain to the producer, to the insured, the consequence of that option. If the producer, the insured, needs forage, needs it now, they're going to, if they can wait till after June 25th to plant a cover crop for harvest, they could harvest it and still collect 35% of their corn PP payment. That may be the best option for them. You know, there's lots of choices. You know, after November 1st or later, they could harvest a cover crop. Depending on what your needs are, that cover crop may not be in the best of shape by that time. Most likely we've had a hard freeze and everything else, but certainly if you wanted to wait that long, you would be able to collect 100% of your corn prevent plant guarantee and still do that. Now again, you would not be able to ever harvest that corn cover crop for seed. We've had some questions in the office about the ability of corn or soybeans, for instance, to be used as a cover crop. Our answer is we don't prevent that from happening. Again, we're expecting them to follow the guidelines and the definition of what a cover crop is. For soil erosion control and soil health, planting corn may not fit that. You know, maybe if you're spreading corn, not in rows or something, maybe it fits. But again, we're going to leave that to the local experts to determine that. But again, a producer could not harvest that crop for grain or seed at any time without losing prevent plant money for the prevented planting crop, usually corn. So again, and even then, there are other considerations to think about. We've been asked, well, what about taking bin run corn and planting it? Well, we don't care, but Monsanto or someone else will take a dim view of that. From what I understand, you're not allowed to plant that seed at any time for any purpose. And so you don't want to jeopardize getting yourself or risk getting yourself into some kind of a suit with Monsanto either on those kind of issues. So anyway, lots of things to consider. Again, talk to your agent, ask the consequences of certain actions. And again, there are things for crop insurance that are okay that may not fit your conservation plan with your NRCS office or with FSA. For instance, RMA does not require a cover crop to be planted on prevent plant acres. Other agencies may require that depending on the situation. So again, you're going to have to talk to, make sure you're well informed and talking to everyone about this. So that's really all I had, Luke. So I'll turn it back to you.
Thank you so much, Kevin. Great job. We're going to bring up Bob Hartzler from Iowa State University Extension. And then after that, Sarah Carlson, and then your questions, folks. So start thinking about what questions you want to stick in the chat box at this time. Go ahead, Bob.
Okay, go ahead. I'm Bob Hartzler, Extension Weed Scientist at Iowa State, and I'm going to talk a little bit about something that could throw a wrench into these cover crops. I'm going to go through it real quickly. So I think most people realize that several factors influence the potential of the herbicides that have been applied this spring affecting the cover crop. Most important is the specific herbicide that's used. These products will vary widely in the risk that they pose to various cover crops, both the product and the rate applied, and then the soil type that's used. Then the cover crops, there's a wide range in sensitivity of the cover crops, and each cover crop is going to have a various level of tolerance to the various herbicides. So with all the herbicides that are available and the variety of cover crops people use now, it's a pretty complex issue, and unfortunately there's not a whole lot of information available to help guide decisions on which species might be most tolerant to an individual crop. And then finally, the environment. All the rain we've had, that will help us somewhat because it does dilute the herbicides a little bit, helps break them down. But if we want to put some cover crops on during prevented planting, a lot of these herbicides won't have had time to degrade. Just going to quickly show two slides that do show the wide variability and sensitivity of the different species. This is some work that Bill Curran did out at Penn State last year. And basically they planted atrazine at a range of rates and then directly drilled several cover crops to see their sensitivity. And so here are some grass crops, and including oats, cereal rye, sorghum sudan grass, and annual ryegrass. And you can see that the sorghum sudan grass was highly tolerant, and so at the full rate, there's only about a 20% reduction in stand. And that's because sorghum sudan grass is a warm season species, and it's relatively tolerant. But the cereal rye was fairly sensitive, and with almost a complete failure of stand at the half rate. So fields that have a full rate of atrazine applied this spring, it's probably going to be very unlikely anything other than sorghum sudan grass would survive. These looking at some broadleaf cover crops, and I think the take-home message here is that, especially with the broadleaves and with grasses also, the seed size has a big influence on the ability to tolerate herbicides. Of these species, the hairy vetch and radish had the largest seeds, and they were most tolerant of the atrazine. But at the half rate of atrazine, all the species were still had a complete stand failure except for the hairy vetch. This is just a list of most of the herbicides I think we would be concerned about, and broke them down into herbicides having moderate to high risk of injury to cover crops. Again, when you look at this list, you need to keep in mind that it is species dependent. So atrazine is, probably one of our hottest herbicides in terms of persistence. But if you're going to plant sorghum or sorghum sedan grass, because of that species tolerance, it's not an issue. So when you consider, ranking herbicides, you need to take into consideration the species that you're looking at because of the wide range in tolerance. Then the thing that is most frustrating to deal with is when we look at the labels of the herbicide, that in many situations there are going to be restrictions that limit options in terms of what can be planted on these acres that have herbicides applied. And we need to keep in mind that a herbicide label is a legal document, and so what it specifies is what needs to be followed, even if in some situations it may not make a lot of agronomic sense. And there are several good reasons why many of these herbicide labels do have restrictions on what cover crops you can plant. Probably most important is that in many situations, residues of the herbicide could restrict establishment. So we don't want to be going out there wasting our time and money trying to plant a cover crop that's going to fail to get established due to the herbicide residue. Also, the herbicide companies really haven't taken into consideration the role of cover crops, and so a lot of the restrictions that are on the labels are due to the residues that would be present in the tissue of the cover crop if it was grazed or harvested. And so if any species is going to be used as feed, the company has to determine potential residues that might remain in there and what impact those residues would have on the food chain. And so in many situations, the restrictions are there because the cover crops would possess residues that would be illegal. And then finally, and I think this comes in play in a lot of situations, is that the companies don't have data available about the sensitivity of these various species or the potential for residues. The whole cover crop issue is relatively new, and in the past the companies didn't take this into consideration when they developed their label, and so because of that it's either not addressed, or it may just they took an easy way out and said don't plant these species. So one of the things I've tried to dig into is, do the restrictions on the labels pertain to a cover crop if it's not going to be used for forage or grazing? Several states have issued statements saying that they don't, and so the regulatory agency in Indiana has said that as long as the cover crop is only used as cover, it's not going to be grazed or used as forage, it's okay to plant it even if the herbicide label specifies not to plant that species following use of the herbicide. If a grower does this, they take the responsibility if the herbicide happens to kill that crop. And I know Pennsylvania also has made that ruling. Here in Iowa, because this is such a new issue, they haven't sorted things out with the lawyers. They stated it's a complex issue and they're working on it. My hope is that since other states have made the decision that if it's truly a cover crop, we don't need to pay attention to those restrictions, and hopefully here in Iowa we'll get that same ruling, but that's up in the air. So at this point in time, if a herbicide label specifies that you can't plant something such as rye for 9 months, that is what should be done. So pay attention to the labels because that is a legal document and you are responsible for following that label. And that's all I had to say. And so, Okay, so John asked about planting anything following Corvus and Triple Flex, and that is a combination of, I think, 5 active ingredients, and I would agree with this statement that it's unlikely you'd be able to get anything established following full use of those, especially on a prevented planted acre. Now, maybe this fall, with that combination, I suspect reduced rates were used, and there's a good probability that something like rye might be able to get established in the fall. I doubt it would be able to get established in July. So the issue about compliance, that is a problem, and if Barb Stewart's still online, maybe she could answer that question. But definitely, I think it's going to be very difficult, if not impossible, to get anything planted other than corn because of that combination of herbicides. And I'm going to turn it over to Sarah.
Okay, Luke, if you could switch to mine, and then I'll just move us into questions after I go through just a few quick thoughts on getting a cover crop successfully established after you would have revisited what herbicides you put down and looked over Bob's PowerPoint again in this presentation. So normally, as Bob said, and as most folks have said, we don't plant cover crops this early in the year. And normally we would have had a plan to plant the cover crops if we were going to do them. So I just came up with some quick rules of thumb from farmers that I had surveyed from our list of practical farmers about this. So we want to make sure that we're planting the right cover crop, and that could be based on what you want the cover crop to do, like what Barb was talking about, or that you have put down herbicide and you want to make sure that you have good, successful establishment. So plant the right cover crop the correct way, the right way, and at the right time. And Barb talked a little bit about this. So we have like the immediate prevent planting time, like after that June 25th period, the summer time versus the fall time. And those are really different. And so we want to make sure we're planting the correct seed at the correct time. Number 2, successfully established cover crops will help you reduce weed pressure. Make sure you're checking seed supplies today. If you're even interested in planting cover crops, you need to be calling seed suppliers now because they're quickly running out of some different species. Don't plant seeds too deep if you're not using a grain drill. Unless they were larger seeds, then you want to make sure you are planting them deep enough, and I'll show some pictures. And then revisit the rules of cover crop tolerance to herbicides, like what Bob just showed, and then cover crops improve soil health, and since this is such a wide open opportunity to plant cover crops, we want to try those mixes if they fit correctly. So this illustration kind of shows why timing is critical for successful cover crop establishment. We see the calendar year up here. We have the A period, June to July, which is kind of that immediate after prevent planting time period for cover crops. Then we have the August, September, and October, November. And those are kind of the early fall and then the later fall. And we see different species that do well at different times. So the warm season legumes and warm season grasses, things like bursting clover, cowpeas not up there, but that'd be a warm season legume. Those are really on the early end. And those could be planted and successfully established in that July time. And then even a little bit later into July, the other legumes would work there that are on the list. And then the different grasses, we see that the spring small grains like oats and barley and rye, if they were the spring version, could be planted in the early time, and then the winter versions of those need to be planted later. So to get things successfully established, we have a couple different seeding options, and most folks might not have a grain drill, but a grain drill would be the best way to plant a cover crop so that you could make sure that your depth is correct. And we see in the bottom right-hand picture that's a kind of common drill. There's 2 seed boxes on it. And so if your seed was already mixed, you could just throw it into the big hopper and that's going to be drilled. Usually the box in the back has just drop-down tubes that are broadcasted on the soil surface, but let the seed just broadcast on the soil surface. So one other picture on this page is the cultipacker or the harrow. And for those small seeded cover crops, we want to make sure they get good soil to seed contact. So some other options might be broadcasting and then following up by harrowing or cultipacking. You could use a tractor fertilizer spreader to get it out there. Or you could even maybe use your planter if you were planting something like cowpea or winter pea or maybe even hairy vetch. Some of the bigger seeds, those might work through a planter if you didn't have access to a drill. If you are getting a mix, you know, that has some larger seeds and smaller seeds like grasses, like annual ryegrass, tillage radish, which would be like the size of a garden radish seed, and hairy vetch, which is like the size of a BB, you'd want to make sure you're planting deep enough for those bigger seeds, just because if they imbibe water and then they're on the top of the soil surface, they might not germinate, they might not live because they don't have good soil to seed contact. So it's a little tricky if you buy a mix. If you bought separate species, so like you wanted to plant oats and crimson clover and they weren't mixed, you could either put them in different boxes in the drill and then make sure the depth is correct, or you could do two passes, either just spreading one broadcast and then harrowing, and then the other one, like crimson clover, for example, just maybe putting it on the soil surface. But good soil to seed contact is going to be really critical, and reducing soil disturbance as much as possible, because in July we may not get any new moisture. So the moisture that would be needed, you know, in the springtime when we would normally plant these crops would be there, and that would help get them into the ground and get them germinated and get them through the summertime when we don't usually have rain. So if you worked the soil, you're going to lose a lot of soil moisture right at the time when rainfall may be less than it is right now. So just some thoughts to think about. Legumes that I broke down into overwintering legumes versus non-overwintering legumes, just to have folks think about. And on the left side, the pictures, those are overwintering legumes, and the right side are non-overwintering legumes. And so before corn, like if you're going to 2014 corn, you might want to include quite a few legumes in any cover crop mix you pick. And you see on the left-hand side, crimson clover is on the overwintering side, and normally it doesn't overwinter in Iowa because we don't plant it early enough. But these legumes planted early enough, like before August 15th or before September 1st even, drilled, you know, with full sun, they will do fine and they should overwinter. And then the non-overwintering ones, just physiologically, they can't withstand winter, so they will die. But the winter pea I have on the non-overwintering, because if you planted it in July, I don't think it's going to survive the winter. I think it's going to go even to reproductive state and probably will die in the first winter kill. But if you planted winter pea sometime in early September or late August, so in the early part of fall, it should overwinter at that time because it probably wouldn't have gone reproductive. Okay, next set, grasses and other broadleaves. Again, overwintering is on the left, other and non-overwintering is on the right. Buckwheat's a cover crop that producers might want to think about. It has an interesting, the root zone of buckwheat is more acidic, and so that might change the chemical reactions in the soil to make different micronutrients available. Buckwheat has really great properties and really great things that it does to the soil, so it might be an opportunity to put that in. And that's pictured down in the bottom left-hand corner there, a field of buckwheat. And it's perfect for this time of the year. It really likes the heat. So other grasses that would like the heat are sorghum Sudan grass, millet, teff. Those are all warm season grasses, sunflower. And then I put some notes next to the radishes and forage mustard. Those are the brassicas. And like in your garden, if you planted a brassica in July, it is going to bolt, and so you're going to get seed, which you may or may not want. So you might want to plant those after August 1st. Any of the spring small grains could be planted. July 1st, and they'll do fine. And then the winter small grains, if they're going to be planted early in, before August 1st, they have a higher likely of winter kill. So planting the winter small grains now, thinking they're going to be there next year, if you're going to soybeans or something, they might have winter killed. And then overwintering, if you plant the winter small grains later, like after August 10th, it should overwinter. And then rapeseed and canola, those can overwinter also if they're planted after August 15th. So just a quick example, if you're going to corn, just two pictures here. You probably want to plant a legume-heavy cover crop blend, which is the bottom left-hand picture. And then in the top right side, we see some creative planting where we have rye mixed with radish. And since those radishes are not going to overwinter, that would be the place you'd plant corn the next spring, and you wouldn't have the rye to deal with in the row, and then come back and kill the rye a couple days before you plant. So those are some creative options that farmers are trying. And then before soybeans, really the choices are endless. Just if you're looking for the cover crop to overwinter before a 2014 soybean crop, because you want good soil protection, then you should try to wait until mid-August to plant any of those winter small grains just to increase their success in overwintering. Okay, so to find some seed houses, you can visit our cover crop business directory. You can find it on our website, and there's the link to that. And that has a whole list of cover crop seed houses. And then I'm going to just jump right into questions because I think it's time. So hopefully everyone's still around, and we've answered two of them so far. What's the next one here? Oh, this is for Kevin. Any chance that RMA will allow release of the cover crop acres on prevented planting acres for forage prior to November 1st? Kevin, if you can switch on your mic.
Can you hear me? Hello?
Yes.
Am I coming through?
I can hear you.
Okay. We've been getting a lot of questions on that. And the answer that we have received from RMA in DC is that it's very unlikely. It really would be a violation of the Federal Crop Insurance Act, because that act said in order to get 100% of prevent plant payment for one crop, you can't get a benefit from another crop and during the same crop year. And the November 1st date was about as early as they figured they could push it without violating the act. So
okay.
It's I would say very unlikely.
Okay, good to know. Another question here. If you chop a cover crop after November 1st, is that considered harvesting?
Well, I assume that's for me also, RMA. We have asked that question just as a clarification because everything that we read and everything you read says you can either graze or harvest, or you can't harvest for seed or grain. So there's a bit of a gap there in the middle about chopping. We're going to assume, but I don't have the answer yet, and we can get back to you with the final answer. We've sent it down to Kansas City several days ago. They have not gotten back to us. But it would seem like it would be allowed under the haying broad definition because it isn't harvest for grain or seed. But again, that's premature really to take that to the bank. I'd like to get some time and make sure I get that answer directly from Kansas City RMA.
Okay, another question. If you plant a grass legume cover crop and it's only 20 acres of an 80-acre HEL field, do I have to fence it off before grazing stalks in the fall? And is that, and Lolly, is your question because of you want the stand to continue until the 2014 spring, or you're concerned about crop insurance compliance or HEL compliance? Both. Okay, so Barb, could you jump on for HEL compliance issues? Would they have to fence off that 20 acres of a grass legume cover crop if they were going to graze the stalks on the rest of that ground?
Okay, we're looking at if it's an HEL, the whole field has to be HEL. In other words, if it's the whole field will either be designated as HEL, not just a soil type. So if he's got 20 acres in an 80-acre field, I can't remember whether it's 33% HEL requires the whole field be HEL, but you'd have to treat the whole field as HEL. So it depends upon whether the field is all HEL. Okay, it's all HEL, then that applies. And what we're looking at is we need the residue there when you plant the 2014 crop. So we're recommending that you don't graze it and overgraze it, but the truth of the matter is we're going to be looking for residue in 2014. So if you graze it and don't take much off and you've got the residue levels there that are required in your conservation plan, then that's fine with us. But where we're going to be checking is in the 2014 after you plant that crop, whether you have the residue levels there that are needed in your compliance plan. The cover crops and how you treat the cover crops are what we're recommending to help you be sure that you get your residue levels there that are needed in the 2014.
And now as far as the grass and legume overwintering, are you going to go back to corn in 2014? Molly? Are you hoping to get nitrogen out of it? Okay. So, right, if you graze it, you're going to, if you can, based on what Barb said, which that seems like you'd have to be really careful on how much residue you took off. Yes, you're going to get the manure back, and it's better than if you hayed it or something, but you are going to decrease some of that nitrogen that's available. And there's probably some other farmers on here that could speak to that. I mean, the grass will become more available because you'll ran it through a cow, and then that manure will be there. But just overall, you're going to use quite a bit of the above ground, and that's just going to reduce your overall nitrogen content of that next year's corn. And you have to be careful in the spring that you don't increase compaction when you've got the cattle out there. So you have to make sure there's enough growth to meet that HEL residue requirement, which can be tricky in the spring. Although with this early fall planting date, you should have quite a bit of residue. So I'm just trying to think through this. So I think off-site we should discuss this more. So call our office. That's the best I can do on that one. Okay, after using Matador, would rye work as a cover, or would a clover be a better option? And Dr. Hartzler is going to take that one over.
Okay, so that's one of those where the label says don't plant either of those crops for 12 months. So technically you shouldn't. But if it was going to be just for a cover crop, that's a three-way combination, and I suspect that with 3 herbicides in, there are lower use rates in the standalone product, so I'm pretty comfortable with rye if you waited till August. Clover, probably August. I think either of those would have a good probability of survival, but it would be an off-label action. So, but hopefully we'll get a ruling about the planting of true cover crops that are not going to be harvested.
Okay, so Jensen, if you want to follow up on that, send us another chat. Okay, John says, what is the latest date to plant a cover crop on HEL land due to herbicide? You mean how early could you plant a cover crop if you have herbicide carryover? Is that what you're asking? And it's HEL ground. I need clarification.
They want to be in compliance
You want to be in
So they know-
compliance with
so
the
they know
label
They have to know
with HEL. Okay.
So they have to.
Okay, let's see what John says. To be in compliance with HEL. So that's a Barb question, I think.
Okay.
So what's the latest date, Barb? Yeah.
All right. I think what NRCS is looking at is make sure that you have the residue there when you plant the 2014 crop for compliance. Now, for erosion control this year, it would be beneficial if you had something growing out there now, or as soon as you can get something growing out there for protection of the ground this summer and this throughout the summer months. And I guess I have a question then going to Kevin is, and Bob, if you've got a corn herbicide out there, can you go ahead and plant corn now? Just use Ben corn, have volunteer corn out there. Just make sure that it doesn't go to seed for a cover crop now.
Now, I think Kevin made the point that a lot of the corn would be traited, and so there would be violating the patent laws by planting thin run seed. And maybe there's some ruling about if it's poor not to be harvested. I can't imagine one of the seed companies chasing somebody down in that if it was planted late enough to where it wasn't going to yield. But I would definitely talk to the seed company before doing that.
Yeah, for crop insurance purposes, we don't care. Again, as long as it wasn't harvested for seed, corn can be considered a cover crop, or at least we don't have anything that prohibits corn. Now, maybe another agency might weigh in and say corn is not an acceptable cover crop, but for RMA purposes, that's not a problem. With that, just cautionary note that about the trademark violations.
So John suggests planting a non-GMO bin run, and I know Green Cover Seed has that for sale, and I think Legacy Seeds does for cover crop specific purposes. So maybe that's an option. Derek has a question. If someone planted a radish by the beginning to middle of July, how long, so this is the cover crop radish, that big daikon radish, how long before a lot of vegetative growth would start, and what kind of growth could be expected by the time it is frost killed? So what's tricky about planting radish at this time of the year is that it's not going to put as much energy into the tuber because it's going to think seed production because it's so stinking hot. So you're probably going to give up quite a bit of tuber growth on the radish. But as far as it getting out of the ground and going, I mean, it's like within 5 days, it's jumping out of the ground. It really starts growing fast. But then it's being planted outside of its normal time. So putting it in July, I think you're going to go to seed really fast and reseed like, gosh, I bet maybe within 2 months. And then you're in September, and it's laying on the soil surface, and then it would start growing more of a tuber. So actually planting this early, you get 2 crops out of it, I think, and then that second crop would probably be your tubers. And then, the tubers can grow really long and wide, very large, and the above ground growth is probably only at the height of maybe mid-calf, and below it's maybe the length of like the entire length of your calf, I'd say. So I think more successfully would be to plant it, to wait a month probably and do it. I hope that answered your question. Okay, seed supplies are rapidly depleting. Much of our fall seed will be used this summer. To stretch seed supplies, what is the minimum seeding rate on rye grain to achieve compliance? This is a great question, Bert. So just a couple things to think about. There are still summer cover crops available, and there will be new seed coming at harvest. So we don't need to plant the winter small grains outside of their normal planting time and sort of waste that seed by planting it too early, because if we plant winter rye too early, it's just going to stay vegetative. And then, like I said, it's it's probably going to winter kill because it will have wasted all of its energy in above ground growth in the summertime. So if I were thinking about this, I would try to go heavy on the summer cover crops, which are like the spring small grains, the warm season grasses, the warm season legumes, and use that supply up first. And I'll be having new crop harvested here soon. And then wait and do the winter small grains in their normal time, like after August 15th, so that we don't put so we don't have an issue with the seed supply for the winter small grains, which, you know, are like winter rye, winter triticale, winter barley, and winter wheat. So I checked in with 3 seed houses before this, and they said they feel confident they'll have enough like cover crop radish and annual ryegrass and sorghum Sudan grass, and the peas, and definitely a lot of the summer cover crops. They feel they'll have enough supply to meet the demand, even with prevent plant coming on. And the new crop will provide, you know, the gap in that. So you might have to be flexible and wait until seed is harvested in other parts of the country and then cleaned and then, you know, shipped to Iowa. So you might just be planting a month later. So as far as seeding rates, though, that's a really good point. And on my slide, I forgot to bring this up. You can really, I think you can back off the seeding rates pretty dramatically, since if you can drill it especially, you're getting good soil to seed contact. You're going to use that excess soil moisture that's there in the soil to get that germinated and to grow. And so, I mean, that one shot that I show where I'm standing in the field eating some cover crops, that was 34 pounds to the acre total rate. So, and that was a mix of legumes, and I think there was some oats in that mix. So rye, I think you can go down to 35 pounds easily. But I would say that's in August. I wouldn't try to force it into this time. But if you're drilling it, or even if you're broadcasting and then harrowing, maybe you up the rate 5 pounds if you're going to broadcast and harrow or cultipack. But if you're drilling, I think you can go down in the 35 pound range and you'll have a really good coverage. You'll have really good coverage.
Thank you very much, Sarah. Thanks for your questions, everyone. This is a wonderful webinar. I appreciate all our great partners that made this possible, and I definitely want to encourage everybody, if you want to re-listen, we'll have the archive available soon. Look for more Farminars from Practical Farmers of Iowa at practicalfarmers.org/Farminar, and we'll see you all soon.